Mike, it's so great to connect today. This has been a long time coming, so I'm glad we were able to finally connect today.
Me too. Thanks. Appreciate it.
You've been teaching, training, writing about leadership. You've completed multiple combat tours in both Afghanistan and Iraq. What experiences have you had or lessons have you learned that you'd most like to share with others?
Yeah, I think that the thing that the one thing I would say is what I tried to write about in my first book, Leadership and Balance. And it's the realization that came to me that leadership and the essence of leadership is finding the balance between how we naturally want to show up as a leader and what the situation demands of us. And that to me is the crux of the problem that most of us don't know. We don't know our natural tendency or preference in what I consider to be the four primary domains of leadership. And even if we do, we often don't know that the situation demands something different than that from us. It requires us to communicate differently or to adapt differently. Um, and so the problem generally is when we don't know our tendency or we don't see the imbalance and we don't act on it, that's when things start falling apart. Um, I don't know if you want me to elaborate further on the domains or the balance piece of that, but that's
It
my gist of it.
Definitely I want to hear that. So just the first thing, it just reminds me of one of my favorite books on leadership written by Jeffrey Pfeffer, leadership professor at Stanford. And he says, people tell you to be authentic as a leader. And while there's value in authenticity, his whole point is that's a BS approach to leadership. As a leader, you don't need to be authentic to who you are. You need to be authentic to what the job requires.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree with that 100%. Right. Sometimes those two things are in alignment, and that's a thing of beauty. That's great because it makes life easy. It makes the job easier. Um, but that's not always the case because the situation's always changing. We live in a very dynamic, volatile world, and so it could be something as simple as getting some new team members, or having a new product or a new technology that comes in and disrupts everything. And what worked for you yesterday may not work for you today.
Yeah.
So it's not about, I agree with that. It's not about being authentic. It's about, to, again, my model, know yourself and your natural tendency for each of the four essential domains of leadership. Those are communication, adaptability, focus, and influence. And then know what the situation demands of you in each of those. And when you're not in alignment between how you want to show up and what the situation demands of you, you've got to have the skills and the courage to do what I call be the fulcrum. You've got to be the point of balance to either create balance or maintain balance in your organization. And balance isn't about things being equal. Balance is about finding the equilibrium. So it's not about, it may not last forever. It may just be for a small amount of time. Um, so the domains, communication, I define as being what happens between the extremes of transmit as an exclusive tendency. If you were 100% transmit, you wouldn't need anybody or anything else to tell you anything. You would just be constantly transmitting. On the other end is receive, right? And those are just easy concepts to understand. And you might look at that and go, oh, transmits could be bad and receive could be good. But again, that's out of context, right? Um, the next domain is adaptability. I define that as being between the extremes of rigid and flexible. And most people go, "Oh, rigid's bad,
Yeah.
flexible's good." And I would say, no, it depends on what the situation is. If you're talking about safety, if you're talking about something like, I mean, I've never had to do this, but shutting down a nuclear reactor probably has a specific set of protocols and steps that if you
Yeah.
weren't adhering to it rigidly, you could have something go seriously wrong, right? And so there's that's not a situation that allows for flexibility, right? I'm going to take this step out, or I'm going to move ahead to that's not allowed, right? So it doesn't make sense. There are times when the situation demands that you be rigid. Um, and so the third one, focus, to me, that's the purpose domain. What's your purpose in life? Is your purpose to serve yourself or to serve somebody, something else besides yourself? And while that would lead most people to go, well, selfish is always bad. And I would say I would never want to work for an organization or be a part of an organization that elevated selfish to something higher. I do believe that somewhere along that continuum, most of us screw this up as leaders. We are so afraid of being perceived as selfish that we pass on opportunities, that we do things that don't put us in a position to continue to grow and advance. And so taking care of ourselves, I like to remind people, hey, if you want to do good in the world, it helps to do well first.
Yeah.
Bill and Melinda Gates weren't able to give away billions of dollars because they wanted to do good. They were able to give away billions of dollars because they did very well
Yeah.
in the business world first, right? And then the last one, control, I define between, influence, I define as the difference between the extreme of controlling, where you tell people what to do and how to do it, and commanding, where you tell people what to do and why it's important, and you let them figure out how. Um, all of those things can be good or bad depending on the situation. All of those things can be appropriate depending on the situation. And I think that's the key as leaders, is to figure out which is appropriate. Can I do it? If it's something that's not my natural thing I want to do, that can be a real tough thing to do. I mean, if you get down to the point where, I see this as a really dangerous combination, right? People who are like incredibly high on the selfless end of the focus scale, but pretty high on the controlling end of the influence scale. And those people will work themselves into an absolute grade because they want to tell people what to do all the time, but they don't want to like burden people. They want to do things on their own. And they say they want to have a lot of control, but they also want to be like, taking on a lot of it for themselves. And so that can be a deadly combination. Um,
So
in my
this is so interesting to me, Mike, because in my leadership class, we talk about how there's no one best way to be a leader. And this is something that I didn't appreciate when I was younger. When I was younger, I thought, like, of course, there is, the best leaders, I just have to follow them and do what they do, not realizing that the best leaders are the best leaders because they're adapting to the situation. And I would have thought, like, okay, servant leadership, that's the best because then you're just constantly serving other people. Well, that can be the best, but you can also get taken advantage of if you're a
That's
servant leader,
right.
and you
That's
maybe
right.
neglect yourself. And like you're saying, if we don't build up ourselves, we don't have anything else to give. So yeah, we can focus exclusively on others, only to the point that you start hurting yourself, and then you can no longer give to other people. And
That's
so I
right.
love this idea that none of these are good or bad. They are all situationally appropriate. And so I'm curious, like for example, on the influence one, like how did you learn that control versus command is neither good nor bad, but it just depends on the situation?
Yeah, the biggest epiphany for me, and unfortunately was after the fact, was as a battalion commander in the 82nd Airborne Division. I replaced a guy who was an absolute tyrant. He would just, it was his way or the highway. This is how you're going to do it. And my natural tendency is to be closer to the other end, to be more commanding, to be more indirect with how I influence people, to tell them what to do and why it's important. And my people weren't ready for that. My company commanders, my first sergeants, my platoon sergeants, um, they weren't ready for that kind of influence. And so, had I recognized it in terms of how I wrote about it 10 years later, I would say that I should have been more controlling with them at the beginning, telling them exactly what I wanted them to do and how to do it. And then gradually start working them as they develop their skills and their comfort level and their belief in me, that when I say, hey, this is really how I want you to be. I want you to make decisions. I want you to use your best judgment on how to do things. Just so long as we get to the place we all know we need to get to, and that could have gradually gotten them there. And I didn't do that because I fell back on my natural tendency for influence, which is more commanding, and we screwed some things up early on, or we didn't perform as well as we could have. And that's how I learned. That's how I kind of learned the model. And I tell people all the time when I'm briefing this is how I know this model works. The worst leaders I ever worked for, where do you think they show up if they were to take my leadership fulcrum assessment? Would they end up, in the middle or on one end or the other? And the scales run between 10 to 50, so 30 is the midpoint, right? And so what do you think? And most of them will go, well, they're on one end or the other. I'm like, right, you're right. But the worst leaders, which end were they on? They were on the exclusive end. That's right. The worst leaders I ever worked for, pretty much they were tens, maybe 11s, right? They transmitted, they were very rigid, they were very selfish, and they were very controlling. Okay, so that's the worst leaders I ever worked for. Second worst leaders I ever worked for. Where do you think they show up on this thing? I
Yeah,
think about it.
laissez-faire, maybe like the opposite.
Exactly. They're on the exact opposite end. Nice guys. I'd probably drink a beer with most of them.
Yeah.
But all they did was receive. Give me more information. Give me more information. Like it could almost impossible to get them to make a decision. Uh, Very selfless. They would give up on opportunities. They would like. How do your people learn and grow? Your people learn and grow by giving them challenges. If the boss is turning down all the challenges for somebody else to do, and in these cases, particularly, the boss had made their level of whatever they were at, and like, I don't need any more. I don't need to put myself at risk by you guys screwing it up. So we're going to let Second Battalion do that. It's that kind of a thing. They were very selfless. I mean, okay, so like they're selfless. They're passing on the opportunities. They were very flexible, constantly changing their minds. In terms of adaptability. Like you had to be the last person in to tell them a recommendation. I had one guy. I used to wait. I used to watch. And I'd let everybody else get into the office and tell them, "Hey, boss, this is what we need to do." And then we'd get down to about 5 minutes. I was his operations officer. I'd go in and go, "Hey, sir, this is the recommendation. We have three options. I'm recommending this option because A, B, and C." He goes, "Okay, what Lerario said," because we ran out of time. Like he would change his mind until there was no more time, and then we'd go. And and then on command and control, right? The second worst leaders, like they were so laissez-faire, right? They're like, "Hey, just I trust you. Do whatever you think is best." I'm like, "Yeah, but boss, I've never done this before. I don't know how to do it." "That's okay. You'll figure it out." I'm like, "But I've never done it before, right?" And um, so then I tell people, I'm going, "Look, so what I think that proves my point. It's not about where you are. It's what you do with your natural tendency." And I think the guys who were 10s or 11s, the worst leaders, I think they knew what they were doing and they chose not to change or adjust or to be the fulcrum. And the guys on the other end, nice guys, they didn't know. They were unaware of what they were creating because they thought they were doing the right thing. They thought they were being good guys. So I got bullies on one end and wimps on the other. And in the book, I use the term inner fat kid and inner skinny kid to kind of describe this because I use a seesaw as the model to think about this creating balance. And it's my biggest regret from the book is that I use those terms. My wife said, "You can't say that." I'm like, "Yes, I can. I can say that." I'm like, "You shouldn't say that." I'm like, "Yeah, you're right. I shouldn't say that." And if I had it to do all over again, if I ever write a second edition to Leadership and Balance, I will rewrite it to say, your inner bully or your inner wimp, because that's what those guys were. They were bullies or they were wimps. And you don't want to be that as a leader. You want to know what your natural tendency is. You want to understand the situation, and then you want to act. And you want to be the fulcrum when it's out of line.
Mike, this is such a great framework, and it's true. It's the leadership research backs this up. Your own experience backs this up. Everybody's great experience in leadership backs this up. It's not about is autocratic leadership bad? Is democratic leadership superior? It's when should I use autocratic leadership and when should I use democratic leadership? So,
That's right.
anything else you want to say? I'll just give you the last word as we wrap up here.
No, you know, I've been retired now, gosh, 16, 17 years from the Army. 10 of those I worked as a defense consultant contractor. And for the rest, so I guess 17 years, because for 7 years, I've been doing this gig on my own consulting service. And I'm having the time of my life. I get to have sessions like this with people like you to geek out talking about leadership. I get to work with clients who have some real issues and some real successes, and I get to see it as a spectator, if not an active participant. And so I like to say that I've had the privilege for going on 50 years now of being a student and a practitioner of leadership every day of my life. And I hope that doesn't stop anytime soon.
Well, this is so great for me. You've given me so many ideas because I teach a version of this concept using slightly different terms. But what I've just decided I'm going to do when I teach this idea, I'm going to use more of your framework. And before I get to them, I'm going to say, "Hey, students, what is the best style?" And let them vote. And they're going
Yeah,
to choose, the wimpy style of leadership because that's the quote unquote best style of leadership.
yeah,
And then I
yeah.
think that will be a much better discussion about like, look, yeah, it depends. It depends on the situation. So, well, Mike,
Cool.
this
Well,
was
I'm
so
inviting myself out to be a guest lecturer for you anytime, free of
awesome.
charge.
Hey, yeah, let's do it. I love it.
Yeah,
Hey,
cool.
thanks so much, Mike. Really appreciate it.
You
And
bet, Nate.
this was such great stuff.
Thank you.